The assessment hall fell silent as the crystalline drone completed its scan of the young human standing alone in the center of the chamber, and 200 cadets from 12 different species watched the massive holoscreen flicker to life with his results, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open contempt as the numbers appeared one by one. Strength class 4 below average. Sensory range 2 limited. Psionic potential 0 null. Threat classification negligible. Laughter erupted from the observation platforms, a chorus of clicks and growls and high-pitched whistles that echoed through the vast space like a judgment from the stars themselves. And Elias Vance stood perfectly still as the sound washed over him, his face betraying nothing of what churned beneath the surface. "This is what the Terrans send us." A voice boomed from the upper tier, and Elias looked up to see a Torvakian cadet rising to his full height of 8 feet, his armored hide gleaming under the artificial lights as 4 jaws spread wide in what passed for a smile among his kind. A creature that would struggle to lift a training weight, who cannot see beyond the visible spectrum, who possesses no mental abilities whatsoever. "Tell me, human, did your species run out of actual warriors?" More laughter followed, and beside the Torvakian, a Velith female let her bioluminescent skin flicker with pale blue amusement as she leaned toward her companion and whispered something that made his 4 jaws clack together in appreciation. Elias said nothing, and his silence only seemed to encourage them further. The Academy Commandant, a towering Krethvari with compound eyes that reflected the light like shattered mirrors, stepped forward and raised one chitinous limb for quiet, and the hall gradually settled into an uneasy stillness as she turned her ancient gaze upon the human cadet. "Elias Vance of Earth," she spoke, her voice carrying the clicking undertones of her species. "Your scores place you in the lowest percentile of any cadet admitted to the Galactic Conquered Academy in 400 cycles. I must ask, for the record, if you wish to withdraw before formal training begins, as there would be no shame in recognizing one's limitations." The offer hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall, and every eye in the chamber fixed upon the small human figure standing alone on the assessment platform, waiting for him to accept the obvious truth that he did not belong here, that his species had made a mistake in sending him, that humanity's 40 years in the Conquered had not earned them the right to stand among true warriors. Elias lifted his head and met the Commandant's compound gaze without flinching, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried clearly through the sudden hush that had fallen over the assembly. "I respectfully decline, Commandant. I am here to complete my training." A ripple of disbelief passed through the gathered cadets, and the Torvakian let out a bark of genuine surprise that quickly transformed into something harder and more dangerous, as he marked this human who dared to refuse the mercy being offered. "Noted," the Commandant said after a long pause, her tone unreadable. "You will be assigned to Epsilon Cohort. Report to Sublevel 7 for orientation, and may you find what you are looking for, Cadet Vance." The words carried a weight that Elias did not fully understand, but he nodded once and turned to walk toward the exit, feeling the stares of 200 superior beings boring into his back with every step he took. His assigned quarters were small and sparse, located in the oldest section of the station, where the environmental systems hummed with a tired rhythm that spoke of centuries of continuous operation. And when the door slid open, he found his roommate already waiting inside. A Morvani, small and four-armed, with wide dark eyes that held none of the contempt he had seen in the assessment hall. "You are the Terran," she said, and it was not a question but an observation delivered with something that might have been sympathy. "I am Kethra, and I have been assigned as your cohort partner. I should tell you that my scores were only marginally better than yours, so if you were hopping for a powerful ally, you will be disappointed." Elias set down his single bag of belongings and allowed himself the smallest of smiles, the first genuine expression he had shown since arriving on Axiom Prime. "I was not hoping for a powerful ally," he said. I was hoping for an honest one. Are you honest, Kethra? The Morvani tilted her head, her four arms folding across her narrow chest in a gesture that seemed to indicate deep thought, and when she answered, her voice held a note of surprise at her own words. Yes, I believe I am, and I will be honest with you now, Elias Vance. The other cadets will make your life very difficult here, especially the one called Torvak who spoke against you in the hall. He comes from a warrior caste that values strength above all things, and he will see your presence as an insult to be corrected. I understand. Do you? Kethra pressed, her dark eyes searching his face for something she could not quite identify. Because I have studied your species, what little information the Conquered has made available, and I cannot determine what you hope to achieve here. You are outmatched in every measurable category, yet you refuse to withdraw when given the chance. Elias moved to his assigned sleeping platform and sat down slowly, his movements careful and controlled in a way that seemed almost deliberate. And when he looked up at his new roommate, something flickered in his eyes that made her secondary heart skip a beat without her understanding why. My people have a saying, he told her, that the race does not always go to the swift, nor the battle to the strong. Sometimes it goes to the one who simply refuses to stop. Kethra wanted to argue that this was sentimental nonsense, that the universe operated on principles of power and efficiency that did not bend for determination alone, but something in his voice stopped her, some quality she could not name that whispered of depths she had not yet begun to fathom. Later that night, when she had dimmed her side of the quarters and curled into her sleeping pod, she heard the soft glow of his datapad activating and glimpsed through half-closed eyes as he opened a file marked with a symbol she did not recognize, a black sun with a human silhouette at its center. Text scrolled across the screen in a language her translator could not parse, and though she could not read the words, she saw the way his face changed as he studied them, the way his gentle features hardened into something ancient and patient and waiting. He closed the file without expression, and the darkness swallowed them both, and Kethra lay awake for a long time afterward, wondering what she had seen and why it made her feel like prey. The first month at the academy taught Elias what it meant to be considered worthless, and he learned this lesson in bruises and blood, and the quiet laughter of those who watched him fall again and again, without ever offering a hand to help him rise. Combat training was the worst of it, a daily ritual of humiliation where cadets were matched against one another in the sparring rings, while instructors observed and recorded their performance for the permanent files that would follow them throughout their careers, and Elias lost every single match he fought without exception. The Torvakian called Torvak made it his personal mission to ensure those losses were as painful as possible, requesting Elias as his sparring partner whenever the opportunity arose, and using the sessions to demonstrate exactly how fragile a human body could be when struck by 8 feet of armored muscle, moving at full combat speed. Stay down this time, Torvak growled after sending Elias crashing to the mat for the 5th time in as many minutes, his 4 jaws clicking with irritation rather than satisfaction. You cannot win. You will never win, so why do you keep getting up? Elias pushed himself to his hands and knees, blood dripping from a cut above his eye where his head had struck the edge of the ring, and his arms trembled with exhaustion as he forced himself upright once more and raised his guard in the standard defensive position they had been taught. Because the match is not over, he said simply, and something in his voice made Torvak hesitate for just a fraction of a second before attacking again. The instructors watched with expressions that ranged from boredom to faint disgust, making notes on their datapads about the human's obvious inadequacy, and wondering privately why the Conquered had ever allowed such a primitive species to send candidates to their prestigious institution. But one instructor watched with different eyes. A Krethvari combat master named Vorshin, whose compound gaze had seen 10,000 cadets pass through these halls over 3 centuries of service, and she noticed something that the others missed entirely. she noticed that the human was learning. Every time Torvak knocked him down, he rose in a slightly different stance, adjusted his guard by a few degrees, shifted his weight to compensate for attacks he had failed to block before. And though these adjustments did not save him from defeat, they showed a capacity for adaptation that Vorshin had rarely witnessed in species far more physically gifted. She said nothing of this to anyone, but she began to watch the human more closely. The Crucible March came at the end of the second month, a legendary trial that had broken countless cadets across the Academy's long history, and when the parameters were announced, even the most arrogant warriors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. 90 hours of continuous movement through a simulated hostile environment, with no rest periods, no stimulants, and no support from teammates. Each cadet would face the ordeal alone, and those who stopped moving for more than 30 seconds would be eliminated from the exercise and marked as failures in their permanent records. The Terran will drop in the first 10 hours, one of the Velith cadets predicted with absolute confidence, her bioluminescent skin pulsing with amusement. Their species requires constant sleep to function. Everyone knows this. Kethra overheard the comment and glanced at Elias, expecting to see resignation or perhaps fear in his expression. But instead she found something that looked almost like anticipation, a quiet hunger that made her wonder once again what secrets her roommate kept hidden behind his gentle facade. The simulation began, and 200 cadets entered the virtual hellscape that the Academy's computers had prepared for them. A shifting maze of extreme temperatures, toxic atmospheres, predatory wildlife, and terrain that seemed designed by malevolent gods to break the body and shatter the mind. By hour 20, a quarter of the cadets had fallen, their enhanced physiologies pushed beyond breaking points that their trainers had assured them did not exist, and medics extracted their unconscious forms from the simulation pods, while the rest pressed on with growing desperation. By hour 40, half remained, and those who still moved did so with the shambling gait of the walking dead, their superior genetics and advanced metabolisms finally beginning to fail under the relentless demand for continuous motion. By hour 60, only 30 cadets continued, and among them was a human who should have collapsed 2 days ago according to every biological model the Academy's scientists had ever developed. Elias walked through the simulated nightmare with the same steady pace he had maintained since the beginning, not fast but never stopping, his body burning with pain that he acknowledged and accepted and set aside like an unwelcome guest who would be dealt with later, and his eyes remained fixed on the horizon that never seemed to grow any closer. The cadets who passed him, those few who still had strength enough to run, stared at him with confusion that slowly transformed into something approaching unease, because he should not still be moving, he should not still be breathing with such terrible regularity, he should not be smiling that small quiet smile as if the Crucible were nothing more than a morning walk through pleasant gardens. Torvak collapsed at hour 73, his warrior's pride finally overwhelmed by a body that had simply reached its limits. And as the medics extracted him from the simulation, his last conscious sight was the human walking past his fallen form without even glancing down. Elias finished 7th. He emerged from his simulation pod covered in sweat and shaking with exhaustion that he had not allowed himself to show during the trial, and Kethra was waiting for him with water and medical supplies that she had prepared in advance, because she had somehow known that he would need them. "How?" she demanded as she helped him to a bench and began treating the blisters that covered his feet. "Your species requires 8 hours of sleep per cycle to function optimally. Every xenobiology text confirms this. So how did you walk for 90 hours without rest?" Elias accepted the water she offered and drank deeply before answering, his voice rough but steady despite everything his body had endured. "Humans need 8 hours of sleep to function optimally," he agreed. "But optimal is not the same as possible. My ancestors crossed deserts and mountains and frozen wastelands with nothing but determination and the knowledge that stopping meant death. And they passed that knowledge down to their children, and their children's children, until it became part of what we are. He met her eyes, and for just a moment, she saw something ancient looking back at her through those tired human eyes. Something that had survived ice ages and predators and catastrophes that should have ended their species 100 times over. We are very good at not dying, Kethra. It is perhaps the only thing we have ever been truly good at. The instructors revised their notes that night, though they still classified the human as a low-priority cadet with minimal potential, and none of them noticed the way Vorshin lingered over his file with compound eyes that gleamed with something that might have been recognition. Somewhere in the station's ancient systems, a monitoring protocol noted the anomaly and filed it away for future reference, adding another data point to a pattern that had been building since the day Elias Vance first set foot on Axiom Prime. The alarms began screaming at 3 hours past midnight, a sound that Elias had never heard before, but recognized instantly from the emergency protocols he had memorized during his first week on the station, and he was on his feet and moving before Kethra had even opened her eyes. "What is happening?" she asked, her forearms reaching automatically for the emergency kit beneath her sleeping pod, and Elias was already at the door, his head tilted slightly as he listened to the chaos unfolding in the corridor beyond. "The hollow," he said, and the word fell from his lips like a stone dropping into still water. "They have breached the station." Kethra's blood ran cold at the name, because every child in the Conquered knew the stories of the hollow, parasitic nightmares that had burned 12 worlds before the combined might of the founding species had driven them to extinction 3 centuries ago, or so everyone had believed until this moment. "That is impossible," she whispered, but the screams echoing through the corridors told a different story, and when the first emergency broadcast crackled through the station's communication system, it confirmed what Elias had somehow already known. Senior cadets were dead or compromised. The rescue mission to the research vessel had been a trap, and Hollow Vanguard forces had infiltrated Axiom Prime through a hijacked shuttle that had docked in the lower sections, the same sections where Epsilon Cohort had been quartered. "We need to move," Elias said, and there was something different in his voice now, something harder and sharper than Kethra had ever heard from her gentle roommate. "Stay behind me and do exactly as I say." They emerged into a corridor filled with running cadets and flickering emergency lights, and Kethra saw immediately that panic had taken hold of even the proudest warriors. Torvakians fled without looking back. Velith cadets stumbled over each other in their desperate rush toward the upper levels, and everywhere she looked, she saw fear that bordered on madness. A scream split the air from somewhere ahead, followed by a wet tearing sound that Kethra knew she would remember for the rest of her life, and 3 hollow drones emerged from a side passage with their parasitic tendrils already reaching toward the nearest prey. They were nightmares given flesh, twisted amalgamations of stolen bodies fused together by the hive intelligence that drove them, and their eyeless faces turned toward the mass of fleeing cadets with a hunger that transcended anything as simple as appetite. Elias stepped forward. He moved with a fluidity that Kethra had never seen in their months of training together, picking up a maintenance tool from a fallen supply cart without breaking stride, and before her mind could fully process what was happening, he had driven the improvised weapon through the cortex node of the first drone with surgical precision. The creature collapsed, and its 2 companions turned toward this unexpected threat with movements that blurred with inhuman speed, but Elias was already among them. Grappling with the second drone, and using its own tendril to strangle the third, while absorbing impacts that should have shattered human bones. He took wounds. Kethra saw the blood, saw the way his flesh tore under chitinous claws, but he did not slow, did not hesitate, did not show any sign of the fear that had paralyzed beings far stronger than himself. The second drone fell, and then the third, and Elias stood alone in the center of the corridor with the bodies of the enemy at his feet, his chest heaving with exertion but his eyes clear and focused in a way that made Kethra's heart pound with something beyond fear. "What are you?" she breathed, and he turned to look at her with an expression that held no deception, no pretense, no mask. "I am exactly what I have always been," he said. "I simply stopped pretending otherwise." More cadets had gathered now, drawn by the sudden silence where there should have been screams, and among them Kethra spotted Torvak crouched against a wall with his four jaws locked shut, and his armored body trembling with a terror he had never known before this night. Elias surveyed the survivors with that same steady gaze, counting heads and assessing capabilities with the practiced eye of someone who had done this many times before, and when he spoke, his voice carried an authority that brooked no argument. "The upper levels are lost. The Hollow will have taken the primary escape routes first because that is where the highest value targets would flee, which means our only chance is to reach the command deck through the maintenance tunnels and trigger an emergency response that will burn these things out of our station." "Who put you in charge?" someone demanded, a Velith cadet whose bioluminescence flickered with desperate aggression. "You are the weakest among us. Your threat classification is negligible. Why should we follow you?" Elias turned to face her, and something in his eyes made her step backward without meaning to, made her superior physiology suddenly feel very small and very fragile in a way she could not explain. "Because I know how to kill them," he said simply. "And right now, that is all that matters. Those who wish to survive, follow me. Those who wish to die, stay here and wait for the Hollow to find you." He began walking without looking back to see who followed, and after a moment of hesitation, they all did. Every single survivor fell into step behind the human they had mocked and dismissed and beaten for months, because he moved through the chaos like he belonged there, like he had been born for exactly this moment. They encountered more drones in the maintenance tunnels, and each time Elias was first into the fight, taking wounds that accumulated into something that should have been fatal while somehow continuing to function, continuing to lead, continuing to protect the cadets behind him with a ferocity that left them staring in disbelief. Torvak found himself fighting beside the human at one point, his warrior instincts finally overriding his fear. And as they stood back to back against a wave of hollow attackers, he glimpsed the truth that he had been too proud to see before. "You were never weak," he gasped between strikes. "You let us think you were weak." "I did not let you think anything," Elias replied as he dispatched another drone with brutal efficiency. "You saw what you expected to see. That is not my fault." They reached the central atrium an hour later, bloodied and exhausted and fewer in number than when they had started, and through the transparent walls, they could see the command deck above them, crawling with hollow forms that had already begun integrating with the station systems. "The only way to stop them is to trigger a core vent through the command deck," Elias said, his voice calm despite everything. "Someone needs to reach the manual override and channel the reactor output directly into that section." "That is suicide," Kethra said. "Whoever does that will not survive the radiation." "Yes," Elias agreed, and before anyone could stop him, he had already begun climbing toward the access hatch that would take him to the command level. The station's ancient AI spoke then, a voice that Kethra had never heard before, resonating through speakers that had been silent for centuries. "Legacy carrier detected," it said, and there was something like reverence in its synthetic tones. "Terran genome confirmed. Authorization pale horse recognized. Do you wish to unseal?" Elias paused at the hatch, and when he looked down at the cadets who watched him with expressions of confusion and dawning understanding, his eyes held something that Kethra would later describe as permission. Permission to finally stop pretending, to finally become what he had always been. "Yes," he said, "unseal." and the universe shifted around him like a great beast waking from a very long sleep. The voice of Axiom Prime's ancient intelligence echoed through every speaker on the station, reaching the ears of every survivor huddled in the darkness and every hollow drone that had infested the corridors. And the words it spoke would change the way the galaxy understood humanity forever. Conquered historical record, classified Tier Omega, now broadcasting to all active terminals. The following information has been sealed by unanimous agreement of the founding species for 12,000 standard cycles, and is being released now under legacy protocol activation by carrier Elias Vance of Earth. Kethra watched as holographic displays flickered to life throughout the atrium, projecting images and data that made her four hearts stop beating in sequence, as the scope of the revelation became clear. The Terran species was first encountered 12,000 cycles before official first contact with their homeworld, Axiom continued, its voice carrying a weight of centuries. Initial assessment teams were deployed to evaluate the primitive civilization developing on the third planet of their system. These teams did not return. The holographics showed spacecraft approaching a blue-green world, followed by static, followed by nothing at all. Secondary assessment teams were deployed with military escort. These teams also did not return. Casualties included 2 heavy cruisers and approximately 4,000 conquered personnel, all lost to a species that had not yet developed spaceflight. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the surviving cadets, and Kethra saw Torvak's 4 jaws hanging slack with shock as the implications of what they were hearing began to settle into their minds. Analysis of recovered data determined that the Terran species possessed no superior technology, no psionic capabilities, no genetic advantages that would explain their effectiveness in combat. What they possessed was something the conquered had never encountered before: an absolute refusal to accept defeat under any circumstances, combined with a capacity for creative violence that defied all predictive models. The display shifted to show anatomical diagrams of human beings, annotated with information that made Kethra's scientific mind reel with horrified fascination. Terrans naturally suppress 60% of their muscular potential to prevent self-injury during normal activity. They possess redundant organ systems, extreme pain tolerance, and the ability to continue functioning despite wounds that would incapacitate any other known species. But these physical traits are secondary to their primary weapon, the Terran mind. They form pack bonds with astonishing speed and intensity, Axiom explained, not merely with their own kind, but with any being they perceive as family or friend. And once such a bond is formed, they will endure any suffering, commit any violence, sacrifice anything including their own lives to protect those they have claimed as their own. Kethra thought of the months she had spent as Elias' roommate, the quiet conversations and shared meals and small kindnesses that she had accepted without truly understanding what they meant to him. And she realized with sudden terrible clarity that she had been claimed without ever knowing it. When the hollow first arose, Axiom continued, 12 species burned, trillions of beings died across 100 worlds before the conquered developed a response. And that response was not a weapon or a strategy or a technological breakthrough. The display showed a planet, Earth, and ships descending toward it with markings that Kethra recognized as conquered military vessels. The response was humanity. Terran volunteers were recruited with the promise of resources for their developing world. And they were deployed against the Hollow with minimal equipment and no expectation of survival. The Conquered's leaders believed they were sending primitives to die as a delaying tactic, while real solutions were developed. They were wrong. The holographics showed humans fighting, not with advanced weapons or superior tactics, but with a ferocity that transcended anything the Hollow had ever encountered, pushing forward through wounds that should have killed them, protecting each other with a loyalty that the parasitic intelligence could not comprehend or counter. The Hollow were defeated in 17 standard cycles. Human casualties exceeded 80%, but the survivors did not retreat, did not surrender, did not stop fighting until every Hollow world had been burned clean and the threat was eliminated. The Conquered's leaders were terrified. They had witnessed something that their models said should not exist, a species that was genuinely dangerous not because of what they were, but because of what they could become when given reason to fight. The decision was made to contain humanity on their homeworld, to deny them access to advanced technology, to pretend that first contact had never occurred. But some among the Conquered argued that this was a mistake, that humanity's capacity for violence was matched by an equal capacity for loyalty and compassion, that they could be allies rather than threats if approached with honesty and respect. These dissenters created the Legacy Protocol, a genetic trigger hidden within the human genome that would unlock their full potential if the Hollow ever returned. The display focused on Elias, who was climbing toward the command deck with movements that had become something other than human, faster, more precise, more deadly than anything his fellow cadets had ever seen from him before. Elias Vance is not merely a cadet, Axiom declared. He is a legacy carrier, one of the humans selected and trained in secret by the protocol's creators to serve as the activation key for humanity's true nature, and he has been waiting his entire life for this moment. Kethra watched as Elias reached the command deck and tore through the Hollow drones guarding the entrance with his bare hands, his body absorbing damage that would have killed any other being, while his face showed nothing but calm determination. And she finally understood what she had seen in his eyes on that first night, the patience of a predator waiting for its prey to make a mistake. The Hollow Queen manifested in the center of the command deck, a massive amalgamation of stolen flesh that spoke with 1,000 stolen voices as it recognized the threat that had entered its domain. "We remember your kind," the Queen hissed through mouths that had once belonged to Conquered citizens. "You burned us once, you and your spiteful determination. But we have evolved, we have grown stronger, we have learned to fear nothing." Elias stopped walking and looked up at the nightmare towering above him, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried clearly through the chaos of the infested deck. "You should have kept fearing us," he said, "because we have not changed at all." "You hide among lesser species," the Queen taunted. "You pretend to be weak, you deny what you truly are. Why do you fear yourself so much, little human?" Elias smiled then, and it was not the gentle expression that Kethra had come to know over months of friendship. It was something older, something that had smiled at saber-toothed tigers and rival tribes, and every other threat that had tried to end humanity across 100,000 years of survival. "We do not hide because we fear ourselves," he said as he began moving toward the reactor controls. "We hide because we fear what we would do to the rest of the galaxy if we ever stopped pretending to be gentle." He reached the manual override, and the Queen lunged toward him with tendrils that could pierce armor plating. But Elias was no longer interested in defense. He activated the reactor vent sequence and channeled every joule of the station's power core directly into the command deck. The explosion lit up the void of space like a new star being born, and the Hollow Queen's screams echoed through dimensions that mortal beings were never meant to perceive, as the fires of human spite consumed her utterly. And in the heart of that inferno, somehow still alive, Elias Vance smiled his ancient smile and whispered words that only he could hear. "We are very good at not dying." The rescue fleet arrived 3 hours after the explosion, their sensors detecting the impossible readings from Axiom Prime's damaged command section and immediately assuming the worst. But when their shuttles docked and their Marines spread through the station expecting to find nothing but corpses and hollow infestation, they found something else entirely. They found survivors. Kethra was among those who met the rescue teams at the main docking bay, her 4 arms wrapped around her narrow chest as she struggled to process everything that had happened in the past several hours. And the first question the Marine commander asked was the same question that everyone in the galaxy would soon be asking. Where is the human? She led them to the medical bay where Elias had been brought after they found him in the wreckage of the command deck, his body broken in ways that should have been fatal several times over, but somehow still breathing, still alive, still fighting to survive with that terrible persistence that defined his species. The doctors had never treated a human before and kept consulting their databases with expressions of growing disbelief as they cataloged wounds that their equipment said should have killed him instantly. Wounds that were already beginning to heal at rates that defied everything they knew about biology. He should be dead, the lead physician said for perhaps the 10th time, her velith skin flickering with colors that indicated profound confusion. By every metric we have, by every standard of medical science, he should be dead. Why is he not dead? Because he chose not to be, Kethra answered quietly, and the physician stared at her as if she had spoken in a language that made no sense. The news spread across the Concord like wildfire in the days that followed, carrying with it the recordings of Axiom's broadcast and the testimony of the cadets who had survived the attack. And the reaction was everything that the original creators of the Legacy Protocol had feared. Emergency sessions were called in every governing body of every species. Debates raged across 1,000 worlds about what should be done with humanity now that the truth of their nature had been revealed. And voices from all sides demanded answers to questions that had no easy solutions. Some called for humanity's immediate expulsion from the Concord, arguing that a species capable of such violence could never be trusted as allies, that they had been right to contain Earth all those centuries ago, and should do so again before it was too late. Others argued just as passionately that humanity had earned their place through blood and sacrifice, that the legacy carriers had saved the station when the Concord's finest warriors had failed, that a species which chose peace despite being capable of such war deserved respect rather than fear. The debate consumed the attention of every politician and general and philosopher in known space. But on Axiom Prime, the cadets who had survived the hollow attack found themselves grappling with more personal questions. Torvak came to the medical bay on the 5th day, his massive form filling the doorway as he stood watching the human who had saved his life. And for a long time, he said nothing at all, his 4 jaws working silently as he struggled to find words adequate to the moment. "I called you weak," he finally said, his voice rough with emotions that his warrior culture had never taught him to express. "I mocked you and beat you and told everyone who would listen that your species was a joke, and you saved me anyway." Elias opened his eyes. He had been resting but not sleeping, because humans did not sleep easily after combat even when their bodies desperately needed it. And he looked at the Torvakian with an expression that held no anger, no resentment, no desire for apology or revenge. "I did not save you because you deserved it," Elias said, his voice weak but clear. "I saved you because you were there and you needed help. That is what humans do." "But why?" Torvak demanded, genuine anguish in his voice as he struggled to understand. "I was cruel to you. I caused you pain for no reason except that I could. Why would you protect someone who treated you that way?" Elias was quiet for a moment, and when he answered, his words carried the weight of a species that had learned too many hard lessons about the cost of holding grudges. "Because cruelty answered with cruelty only creates more cruelty," he said. "And somewhere, a long time ago, my ancestors decided that we wanted to build something better than an endless cycle of revenge. We are capable of being monsters, Torvak, but we do not have to be." Kethra visited him every day as he recovered, bringing him food and water and the latest updates on the political chaos his actions had unleashed. And during one of these visits, she finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind since she first glimpsed that file on his datapad. "You knew this would happen," she said. You knew the Hollow would return, and you knew you would have to reveal yourself. Why did you let us believe you were weak for so long when you could have shown us the truth from the beginning?" Elias reached out and took her hand in his, a gesture of affection that humans made without thinking, but that meant something profound in her culture. And his eyes were gentle again, the ancient predator hidden away behind the mask of kindness that she now understood was not a mask at all. "Because the truth is not that I was pretending to be weak," he said. "The truth is that I was pretending to be strong, the person you saw in those months of training, the one who lost every fight but kept getting up, the one who walked through the crucible and came out the other side, that was real. The violence is what I have to pretend, Kethra. It is what my species has spent thousands of years learning to control, to channel, to keep locked away until it is truly needed. And the moment we stop pretending to be gentle is the moment we become something that the galaxy should fear." He squeezed her hand, and she felt the strength in his grip, the potential for destruction that he held in check with every breath. And she finally understood why the conquered had been right to be afraid, even as she knew they had been wrong to hide the truth. "We choose to be kind," Elias said. "Every day, every moment, we choose kindness over cruelty and peace over war and hope over despair. Not because we are incapable of darkness, but because we have seen what darkness does to those who embrace it, and we have decided that we want to be something else." The academy reopened 6 weeks later, and Elias returned to training despite the objections of physicians who insisted he needed more time to recover. But he refused to accept special treatment or to trade on the fame that had made him the most talked-about being in the galaxy. His file had been updated with a new classification: Legacy Weapon, Threat Level, Maximum. But he trained alongside the other cadets as if nothing had changed, losing sparring matches and studying late into the night, and helping Kethra with her research projects with the same quiet dedication he had always shown. A new batch of cadets arrived at the end of the season, eager young beings from a dozen species who had heard the stories and wanted to see for themselves the human who had killed a Hollow Queen. And one of them, a young Velith barely out of childhood, approached an upperclassman with a question that had been burning in her since she first read the reports. "Is it true what they say about the Terran?" she asked, pointing to where Elias stood quietly in the corner of the training hall. "Is he really classified as a legacy weapon?" The upperclassman, Torvak, who had requested permanent assignment to Elias' training cohort and received it without question, turned to look at his former enemy and current friend, with all four jaws spread wide in what the young Velith would later learn was a Torvakian smile. "Yes," he said, "but that is not what makes him dangerous." "Then what is?" Torvak watched as Elias helped a struggling cadet with her form, his movements gentle and patient despite everything he was capable of, and when he answered, his voice held a respect that he had never shown to anyone before. "What makes him dangerous is that he does not want to be. He is kind because he chooses to be. He is gentle because he works at it every single day. And that choice, that constant effort to be better than what his nature demands, that is the most terrifying thing in the entire galaxy." The young Velith did not understand, but she would learn in the months to come as she watched the human train and study and laugh with his friends, and refused to give up no matter how many times he was knocked down. She would learn that humanity was not dangerous because they could destroy. Many species could destroy, given the right tools and the right circumstances. Humanity was dangerous because they had looked at what they were capable of and decided to be something else anyway. And that, in the end, was the legacy that Elias Vance carried within him. Not the violence encoded in his genes, not the ancient fury that had burned the Hollow to ashes, but the quiet daily choice to be gentle in a universe that had never given his species a reason to be anything but brutal. It was the most human thing of all.